You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I chat with writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 216. In this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Marcie R. Rendon, an award-winning author, poet, playwright, and an enrolled member of the White Earth Nation. She's the creator of the Cash Black Bear mystery series, which follows a sharp and intuitive young Ojibwe woman solving crimes in 1970s Minnesota. Her latest book in that series, Broken Fields, is the fourth one, and it was published just recently here in March. It dives into a gripping rural murder mystery filled with cultural depth, community strength, and rich atmosphere. Can't wait to dig into that and learn more about Marcie and her work here in just a moment. But first, a quick heads up. I'm very excited about this announcement, especially if you are a fan of audiobooks. My psychological thriller, The Basement, is now available for pre-order on Audible. I'm excited to be partnering with Podium to bring this story to life, and it's performed by two incredible voice actors, Vanessa Johansson and George Newbern. So if you love twisty thrillers with dark secrets, I'd love for you to check it out. Just visit thrillingreads.com/AB and pre-order your copy. The audiobook will be released on May 13th, but like I said, you can pre-order it now. I really appreciate your support. All right, let's get into today's conversation with Marcie R. Rendon. And I'm excited to welcome Marcie R. Rendon on the podcast today. She's a powerhouse storyteller, award-winning crime novelist, playwright, poet, and advocate for Native artists. Her latest novel, Broken Fields, is another gripping installment in the critically acclaimed Cash Black Bear mystery series. I always love talking to Minnesota-based authors. My wife is from Minnesota. I went to college in Winona, and we lived. We lived in the Twin Cities for many years before moving out west. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. Read Broken Fields, really enjoyed it. This is the first novel that I've read from Cash Black Bear series. Such compelling characters. So I want to ask you right off the bat, what was your inspiration behind her? And did you always envision her as a serious protagonist?
So I had been trying to write crime novels and was failing at it. I'd written like three that I knew they were bad. I knew they just were bad. And so I thought, well, I can't do this. I should try something else. So I was trying to write a chick novel, I guess. And Cash Black Bear, appeared in my head, and she was like, oh, no. And this whole other story came out that was my first Cash Black Bear novel, Murder on the Red River. And even as I was writing it, I could tell that it was working. And with Cash as a character, it's like I can see her, I can hear her, I know, how she moves physically through life. So that's how the whole series started, was with that introduction to Cash Black Bear. And in terms of who she is and being an inspiration, I think that she is a combination of all of the Native women that I know. Native women, when you say, what's your superpower? Well, for many Native women, the superpower is being a Native woman. They are extremely powerful, resilient, take on hard things, accomplish big things. And so Cash is sort of like a combination of all of these different women that I've known throughout my life.
So you've written in lots of different fields, like from magazines and plays. And so just kind of curious, was this your first crime novel, or had you written other novels before?
Cash Black Bear she would have been the fourth crime novel, because the other ones were written, but they're never going to get published.
Yeah, I have a few of those.
So that's my fourth one, but it's the first published one. And Broken Fields is the fourth in this series. I'm got about 2 paragraphs written on book 5. I have another crime novel, Where They Last Saw Her, that came out in September of 2024. And that one is up. It's a finalist for a Minnesota Book Award. But, before that, in the 90s, I had 2 nonfiction children's picture books published. And I have a couple other ones published since then. And like you said in the intro, I write anything, basically.
Have you always wanted to be a writer? For how long has that always been with you?
I've always been a writer. No one told me growing up that as a Native person, I could grow up and be a writer. It was just never even mentioned or talked about. So I have a whole career when I was growing up and going to college, the thing we were supposed to do was get a degree where we could go back and help the tribe. And I studied pre-law, criminal justice, and American Indian studies. So I had a whole career where I worked within the state prison system here in Minnesota, going into the 5 prisons, doing work release, pre-release kinds of things. And then I worked in a adolescent treatment program and then an inpatient hospital treatment program before I ever said, okay, I'm done. I'm going to make my living as a writer, which is why I write everything, because without a 6-figure book contract, you just got to keep producing.
Yes, exactly. And so that's a fascinating background too. So were you able to draw from those experiences? The prison system and all that. Is that stuff that you've been able to parlay into your fiction?
I actually don't.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that.
It's when you're working with real people, it feels like unethical to use their stories for my gain, I guess. So I just don't do it. The crimes that happen in my novels are things that they're just made up in my mind. They could actually happen. But also I grew up rural Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and know how those rural communities work. Like, people can literally commit murder and get away with it because you're so isolated and people don't talk. They just didn't see that, So that's mostly what I draw on, is the isolation and the distance that happens in rural America, where people can crimes are committed and they go unsolved. In the Cash Black Bear novels, things do get solved. And I think that that's part of the attraction in the series.
Yeah, I think that's what's really cool about the backdrop too of your novels and other novels that I've read like that. And my grandfather was a farmer down there by the Iowa border, by Jackson, Minnesota, and the isolation is just, yeah, like you said, it's just. And as a writer, whenever I'm visiting over there, I'm like, gosh, you could really bury 10 bodies here, nobody would know.
That's right. And even if people did know, there's in those isolated areas, you are required to rely on the people around you. And you may not like them, but if your car breaks down in the middle of a snowstorm and they're driving by, they're the ones that are going to give you a ride. There's a relationship that is required.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool in Broken Fields too. I didn't realize this until I started reading it. Is that it's set in the 1970s. Can you tell us about that? What drew you to that time period, and how does it shape your stories?
I was trying to write a totally different book, contemporary, about a woman that was going to Nashville to break into the music industry. And Cash, that story appeared. It was set in that time. It was those people, those characters, and that storyline. It was almost like I didn't have to think that hard about it. I did have to think about phones. Like, that was,
Google Map it.
There were not cell phones. There was the phone that was hooked to the wall and it had a long cord that stretched in and out or whatever. So those kinds of things, but it's working. And, once that first novel worked and I had the idea for the second novel, once I finished the second novel, I had the idea for the third. And I think that time in history, there was a lot happening. There was the civil rights movement. There was the Vietnam War. There was the feminist movement. There was the rise of the American Indian movement. So there was all of these world-changing events that were happening that were actually impacting small-town America. And so those instances, those historical facts actually color some of the stuff that happens in the novels and people's perceptions of the world in the novels, the characters' perceptions.
Yeah, and your books weave a lot of real world issues, right? Like farm labor abuse and foster care, the foster care system. Is that something you think about when you plan to write these? And how do you balance that? Like, you're crafting compelling mystery for us, but then you also want to shed some light on these issues. How does that balance work?
So the truth is that when I sat down to write the crime novels, I'm trying to write the kind of crime novels that I like to read. You pick them up at 3 p.m. and you can't put them down till 3 a.m. So that's my goal, is to write that compelling of a novel. The fact that whether it's the Indian Child Welfare Act, issues about boarding school, issues about historical trauma, or in the second book, there's the Cash's brother shows up and he's on leave from Vietnam with severe PTSD. They tell you to write what you know.
Mhm.
And I've lived my life as a Native woman in Minnesota. I've never lived anyplace else. This is what I know. And so the fact that those issues show up in the books, I'm not intending, the intention wasn't there to give people, like a history lesson or a social studies lesson, but I don't know anything else. These are the people that I know. This is life. So that it shows up in there. My first editor, the Murder on the Red River was published by Cinco Puntos Press, and Lee was my first editor, wonderful editor. But there were things that she didn't know, like on page 24 or 27 of my very first book, there's a line where it says that Cash never saw her mother or her brother and sisters again. And I'm just writing, and that's what I write. And Lee says, you're going to have to change this because nobody will believe it. And I said, what do you mean nobody will believe it? It happened all the time. 60% of kids from Red Lake were removed, Red Lake Reservation, northern Minnesota. During that time period, they were removed and placed in white foster homes. From White Earth, they know it was between 40 and 60% of the kids were taken and placed in white foster homes. That's everybody that I know practically. And so I'm just writing what I know, but Lee had no idea of that piece of history. And that wasn't just Minnesota, it was across the continent, right after the boarding school era. Then there was this forced taking of kids and putting them in foster homes. And so Lee said, well, you're going to have to write more about that in this book. I said, no, I'm trying to write crime. I'm trying to write, I don't want to, my intention wasn't to make that a key issue, but it was there because that's what happens. It's kind of like if, an author sets a book in New York City, they probably mention the Empire State Building because that's there. And so many of the things in the books that they're there because they're in my life, they've been a part of my life, they're part of the lives of the people that I know. And I'm not thinking about that. I'm trying to write a crime that will, a novel that will pull people in, that it's exciting enough, that there's enough action happening that people just keep reading. And then they want the next one. And build compelling characters that people are very invested in.
Yeah, I noticed that too in your book. Like you also had the Cash has like intuitive abilities. Is that a way of putting in that? Can you tell us a little bit about that too? Is that how do you develop that aspect of her character? And
again, I'm writing what I know. And for Ojibwe people, we have a big belief in listening to your dreams. Mm-hmm. We get up in the morning, I say to my grandkids, this is what I dreamt last night. They say, this is what I dreamt. And there's this sharing of dreams, and you're taught to pay attention to them. And you're taught to pay attention to those gut feelings or those, like you said, intuition. That's just part of what we're taught. And apparently that's educated out of many people in the educational system that most of us go through, where you're supposed to think with your brain, mm-hmm. and everything else is just like fluff or weird or fantasy. And again, it's in my book because that's the world that I know. I know that there are authors who try to create a psychic character. And I'm not trying, I'm just writing. Yeah,
I started to see that now because the last few years there's been at least there's more conversation on that on like all the missing of Native women all over the world, really. Mm-hmm. And HBO, the True Detective, I don't know if you saw that. It had those elements in there too. What do you feel like now that that's starting to the word is starting to get out a little bit more, probably, right?
It is. Number of years ago, I wrote a short story for an anthology called Down to the River. Again, editor was in New York, and my story involved a woman that attempted murder, and she's rescued from the water by two women in red dresses. And in my bio, I wrote, in memory of MMIW. And the editor says, what's this MMIW? So I told him, at any given day, there's between 5,000 and 7,000 missing Native women across this continent. that was the first he'd ever heard of it. And he said, well, you need to write more about this and, put more in your bio. And I said, well, I only got 50 words in there. But so it's like people are unaware.
Mhm.
And there has been a rise of awareness because it was women, First Nations women in Canada, who first said, our women are going missing, they're being murdered, or they're just gone along that highway in Canada over on the western part of Canada. And they started compiling the names of missing and murdered Indian women. And I think it was in 2015 or 2017 that I wrote a spoken word piece. And initially I was just going to read the names of, at that time, the missing and murdered Indian women that people knew of. And it was 90 pages, single spaced.
Wow.
Of names. And I turned that into a spoken word piece. And then I've since then turned that into a play, a performance piece that I've been working with Out of Hand Theater in Atlanta, Georgia to produce, and with Mingijic Theater here in Minneapolis to produce. We just had it performed up at the White Earth Heart Health Conference, February 14th. So it's a huge issue that's directly related to extractive industries and the man camps that spring up around those camps, whether it's gold, uranium, oil, water, it's any place where there's extraction that's happening, but it requires large numbers of men. Mm-hmm. And there's no social construct there. There's no churches, there's no schools, there's no police force. There's, most of the things in a community that sort of compel people to behave. Mm-hmm. Those things are absent in these man camps. And so you see a huge rise in trafficking of anybody that's in the surrounding area. It's not just Native people, but we're the ones that have spoken out about it the loudest, I think. And then there's the introduction of hard drugs or other drugs that aren't typically in those areas. That message comes across in a lot of my writing.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that your books really do capture, like I said before, like a really strong sense of place. Can you tell a little bit for the readers, like about the Red River Valley and how it plays into? I mean, I believe some of the areas that you write are made up by you, but they're like based on real places, right? It's like,
yeah, the people are all fictitious. Is not a Cash Black Bear. There is not a Wheaton. They're the farmers. And there's Borgerud, no real people, but the places are real. Fargo-Moorhead is a real town. Ada, Halsted, Mahnomen, White Earth, Ogama, Bemidji, those are all real towns in, like the Red River Valley goes from like Breckenridge up to Lake Winnipeg in Canada. And then the reservations that are sort of along that eastern border, White Earth, Leech Lake, Red Lake, when you get up on the other side of Canada, I think it's Roseau River. And so those are real places. And farm life is real. People are planting wheat and corn and soybeans and beets and potatoes. And that's that life. The books, because of that's one of that is Cash's job. She's a farm laborer. That resonates with people from rural America, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that from reading the opening book in Broken Fields. She's plowing the field with a tractor, and I thought about my grandfather.
Yeah. That's what people do in this part of the world, Yeah. They ride snowmobiles, and they, they go out there and combine and stand in line at the Crystal Sugar Plant in a beet truck, and that's that life. Mm-hmm. And it's not just like Native people participate in that as workers. I mean, even today, mm-hmm. They go work when the potato harvest happens, and they're probably not out there in the field with burlap bags anymore because there's machinery that does the work, but there's still a need for workers. Same with sugar beet harvest or the combining season.
And were you before you started writing the crime thrillers, were you a fan of the genre beforehand?
That's basically all that I read.
Yeah, so I figured. Yeah, you start reading enough of them, you're like, maybe I could write one of these. Is that kind of epiphany that you had?
Well, I'm a compulsive reader. Yeah. You talk about, I've been writing since I learned how to write, And I've been reading since I learned how to read. But my primary genre has been crime, whether it's fiction or true crime. I've probably read everything that Anne Rule has written, you know. They just tell you to write what you know. And I thought, well, I've read enough of these. I think maybe I'll do it. um, and then failed 3 times, but eventually got it.
And what's your writing process like? Do you like outline, or are you one of the discovery writers?
With the Cash Black Bear novels, I sit down and I write from beginning to end. And I know what the crime is. I know that Cash is going to help solve it. And so far, by the time I reach the end of one book, I've got the idea for the next book. When I'm working on Where They Last Saw Her is the standalone novel, and that has more of an outline. And I'm working on a second standalone, and there's more of an outline for that. And I don't know if it's just a different. Cash is such an alive character that the character propels the story. Where with the standalone novels, I think they're more outlined because the story is the thing and the characters inhabit that world. That makes sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And what do you use? I always ask this because I was so curious about what the other writers' tools that they use. What do you use to write them? Do you use Word or something? Do you prefer something else?
Must be Word. I write in the computer. Yeah, it's Word.
Yeah, it's like I read a lot of people. Like I think 90% is Word.
I have a friend who does Scrivener.
Oh yeah, Scrivener. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's another popular one. Yeah. And so I was kind of wondering too about your writing routine. Can you share that with us? Are you like an early morning writer? Do you always write from the same spot? Can you tell us about that?
I'm a parent. I've been a single parent of raising my own kids and grandkids always living here. So my process is a lot of in my head. I'm writing in my head when I'm cooking, when I'm driving somebody to and from school, when I'm doing the laundry. A lot of it is happening in my head. When I wake up in the morning, I try to answer emails and type down ideas that are like right there. And then I got to get a kid to school, come home, more emails. If I don't have a bunch of other things that I have to do, I can crank out anywhere from 3 sentences to 2,000 words in a day. And then got to feed a kid at night and then before I go to bed, it's another round of emails and getting a few more words out. And I can write any place. I'm my kitchen table, in the car, in a doctor's office. It all depends on what deadline I'm on, what I need to have happen. So I'm writing. That's my job. That's what I do every single day. I don't have another job. Also, like once a year, I try to do a minimum of a 3-week writing residency where I live in Minneapolis, where I can get far enough out of the city so that no kid can call me and need me. And if I can get 3 weeks, I can get as much written in 3 weeks as it would take me 3 months here, just because I don't have the interruptions. So I try to do that at least once a year, someplace, some way.
Yeah, now it's kind of the crunch time for you too, because Broken Field comes out on March 4th, I believe, right? And so you have to talk to people like me. How's that process? Do you enjoy that, or do you just want to be back writing?
My first mentor was Jim Northrup. He was an Ojibwe author from Fond du Lac Reservation in northern Minnesota. And when we first met, I was extremely shy. And he told me, like he said, Marcie, you can write, send your stuff out. And he said, but one thing you're going to have to learn how to do is talk to people. Because if you're going to be an author, you're going to have to talk to people. And I was like, oh my God, no. But I took speech classes, acting classes, performance art classes, spoken word classes to get myself okay with getting up in front of people and talking and answering questions, doing these interviews, doing the book readings and book signings. So it's been a process of learning how to do that, where, if I was just left to my own, I actually thought that you just wrote a book, you sent it out, it sold or it didn't sell, and then you wrote another one. I didn't know that there was this whole book tour thing.
The
I
whole
didn't know
machine.
that, I didn't know that awards were a thing. Like I literally didn't know that. I guess it's the well when we're where they last saw her is a. It's gotten reviews all over the place, good reviews. I didn't know that some of those were important things.
Mhm.
Like in my world, I read People magazine, and I saw where People magazine had a book reviews. And in my mind, I thought, oh, I'll know I made it if I get a book review in People magazine. And then I did. And it was like,
Well, that must have been
oh,
like,
wow, you know? And my other measure of success was I would say in my head, I'll know I made it if I walk into an airport bookstore and there's my book. And that's happened. And I think that other people have different benchmarks for their success or something. New York Times review or a bestseller list of some kind, where those just were never in my vicinity.
Mhm. I want to mention too, your the covers for your books are so amazing. What was that like when you first saw the first cover?
Thank you. Thank you. With Soho, they do I don't know, they have somebody on their staff that does the covers, and they are amazing covers for the Cash Black Bear series. The covers match like the story, and so even the colors kind of match the mood of the book, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, and with the standalone novel, with the first two Cash Black Bear books, the cover was by a native artist from White Earth. And I think that Soho has, I'm not sure if they switched the covers on those two, but mostly I think they have an in-house person that does, like the cover for Broken Fields. And they send me like four different versions of that cover, and I pick the one that I like the most, and they pick the one that they think will sell the best. With Where They Last Saw Her, that cover is by Nicole Hatfield. She's a Comanche artist from Oklahoma. And the publisher found her and found the cover for that book. I want to back up. You talked about, I think it's Dark Winds or the
Mhm.
true crime, true
Oh, yeah,
detective.
True Detective, yes. Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So Isabella LeBlanc is a Dakota actress from the Twin Cities here. I've known her since she was a little girl, and she was in True Detective, and she has been the reader for the audiobook Sinister Graves and Broken Fields,
Oh,
which is pretty cool.
yeah.
There's a native reader for Cash Black Bear.
Yeah, that's got to be great too. Then, like for the representation and understanding of what it feels, what it really is like, right, compared to
Yes.
somebody else. Yeah.
Yep.
And so you said you're working on the next Cash Black Bear. Is that what you're working on now? And when's that coming out?
I have no idea when it's coming out. Soho wants to know when I have a copy for them, and I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know. I I'm writing on that. I'm writing on the second standalone novel. I have another children's book that will come out in 2026. Actually, I have two children's picture books that'll come out in 2026. I had a meeting yesterday about a different play and possible, it's a part of a 10-minute native play series that'll probably be produced in, I guess, 2026. So it's just a 10-minute play as part of a group of other 10-minute plays. So like I said, I'm working on all of these projects all of the time. And I don't have a release date for the next Cash Black Bear or the next standalone novel.
Well, but we have Broken Fields, which comes out March 5th. So by the time people listen to this, they'll be
That's
ready.
it.
It's on pre-order now. So I always like to close things out, Marcie, by asking my guests, because I have aspiring writers that listen to this. So just any sort of advice, and especially if there's like a native readers out there or writers, aspiring writers, any advice on how to get in, how to write a book like this?
Well, I don't know that people need advice on how to write because people who are compelled to write will write. I think that what I mostly encourage Native writers to do is to find a supportive group of other people who will encourage your writing and will open doors for you. They will tell you the names of agents to send your work to. They will send you the names of publishers who might be open to seeing your work. And the key thing is to get it written and then start submitting. Risk that rejection. With my first Cash Black Bear novel, it was 5 years of rejection before I ever got a publisher. And I just kept sending it out and sending it out and sending it out. And so that's the primary thing that I think that people need to do is get the work written and then send it out.
All right, Marcie. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed talking with you. And
all right. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
a big thank you to Marcie Rendon for joining me on the podcast today. If you haven't read Marcie's books yet, I highly recommend to check them out. That's one of the things I love most about this podcast is getting to introduce listeners to new authors or helping you discover even more about a favorite one. You can learn more about Marcie and her work at marcierendon.com. And just a quick reminder, my psychological thriller, The Basement, is now available for pre-order on Audible. It's produced by Podium and performed by the amazing Vanessa Johansson and George Newbern. You can pre-order it right now at thrillingreads.com/AB. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another great author interview. Until then, take care and keep turning those pages.